Good day to you all, my friends. I came here, as I come always to the meetings in New England, as a listener and not as a speaker. And one of the reasons why I have not been more frequently to the meetings of this society has been because of the disposition on the part of some of my friends to call me out upon the platform. Now, I have felt, since I have lived out west of Boston, that in going there, I parted from a great deal that was valuable. And I feel every time I come to these meetings that I have lost a great deal by making my home west of Boston. For if anywhere in the country there is to be found the highest sense of justice or the truest demands for my race, I look for it in the East. I look for it here. The ablest discussions of the whole question of our rights occur here. And to be deprived of the privilege of listening to those discussions is a great deprivation. I do not know, from what has been said, that there is any difference of opinion as to the duty of abolitionists at the present moment. How can we get up any difference at this point, or any point, where we are so united, so agreed? I went especially, however, with that word of Mr. Wendell Phillips, who rightfully criticized the despicable labor policies in Louisiana which forced freed Negroes to go back to the plantations and work for the pitiable pay from the very men who enslaved them. General Banks claims that this policy was to help prepare Negroes to better handle freedom. Mr. Wendell Phillips replied to this, saying, "If there is any patent in the whole history of our struggle, it is that the Negro no more needs to be prepared for liberty than the white man." I hold that that policy is our chief danger at the present moment, that it practically enslaves the Negro and makes the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863 a mockery and a delusion. What is freedom? It is the right to choose one's own employment. Certainly, it means that, if it means anything. And when any individual or combination of individuals undertakes to decide for any man when he shall work, where he shall work, at what he shall work, and for what he shall work, he is a slave. That I understand General Banks to do. To determine for the so-called freedman when and where and at what and for how much he shall work, when he shall be punished and by whom punished. It is absolute slavery. It defeats the beneficent intention of the government, if it has beneficent intentions in regards to the freedom of our people. I have had but one idea for the last 3 years to present to the American people. And the phraseology in which I clothe it is the old abolition phraseology. I am for the immediate, unconditional, and universal enfranchisement of the black man in every state in the Union. Without this, his liberty is a mockery. Without this, you might as well almost retain the old name of slavery for his condition. For in fact, he is not the slave of the individual master. He is the slave of society and holds his liberty as a privilege, not as a right. He is at the mercy of the mob and has no means for protecting himself. Now, it may be objected, however, that this pressing of the Negro's right to suffrage is premature. Let us have slavery abolished, it may be said. Let us have labor organized, and then, in the natural course of events, the right of suffrage will be extended to the Negro. I do not agree with this. The Shenandoah has run blood, the best blood of the North. All around Richmond, the blood of New England and of the North has been shed, of your sons, your brothers and your fathers. We all feel in the existence of this rebellion that judgments, terrible, widespread, far-reaching, overwhelming, are abroad in the land. And we feel, in view of these judgments just now, a disposition to learn righteousness. This is the hour. Our streets are in mourning. Tears are falling at every fireside, and under the chastisement of this rebellion, we have almost come up to the point of conceding this great, this all-important right of suffrage. I fear that if we fail to do it now, if abolitionists fail to press it now, we may not see it for centuries to come. Hence, I say, now is the time to press this right. Now, it may be asked, what do you want? Some men have got along very well without it. Women have not this right. Shall we justify one wrong by another? Shall we at this moment justify the deprivation of the Negro of the right to vote because someone else is deprived of that privilege? I hold that women, as well as men, have the right to vote. And my heart and voice go with the movement to extend suffrage to women. But that question rests upon another basis than which our right rests. We may be asked, I say, why we want it. I will tell you why we want it. We want it because it is our right, first of all. No class of men can, without insulting their own nature, be content with any deprivation of their right. We want it again as a means for educating our race. Men are so constituted that they derive their conviction of their own possibilities largely by the estimate formed of them by others. If nothing is expected of a people, that people will find it difficult to contradict that expectation. By depriving us of suffrage, you affirm our incapacity to form an intelligent judgment respecting public men and public measures. You declare before the world that we are unfit to exercise the elective franchise, and by this means lead us to undervalue ourselves, to put a low estimate upon ourselves, and to feel that we have no possibilities like other men. Again, I want the elective franchise, for one, as a colored man, because ours is a peculiar government based upon a peculiar idea, and that idea is universal suffrage. If I were in a monarch's government, or an autocratic or aristocratic government where the few bore rule and the many were subject, there would be no special stigma resting upon me because I did not exercise the elective franchise. It would do me no great violence. But here, where universal suffrage is the rule, where that is the fundamental idea of the government, to rule us out is to make us an exception, to brand us with the stigma of inferiority. Therefore, I want the franchise for the black man. There are, however, other reasons not derived from any considerations merely of our rights, but arising out of the conditions of the South and of the country. Considerations which have already been referred to by Mr. Phillips, considerations which must arrest the attention of statesmen. I believe that when the tall heads of this rebellion shall have been swept down, as they will be swept down, when the Davises and the Toombses and the Stevenses and others who are leading this rebellion shall have been blotted out, there will be this rank undergrowth of treason to which reference has been made, growing up there and interfering with and thwarting the quiet operation of the federal government in those states. You will see those traitors handing down from sire to son the same malignant spirit which they have manifested, in which they are now exhibiting with malicious hearts, broad blades, and bloody hands in the field against our sons and brothers. That spirit will still remain. And whoever sees the federal government extended over those southern states will see that government in a strange land. And not only in a strange land, but in an enemy's land. This will not die out in a year. It will not die out in an age. They will endeavor to circumvent, they will endeavor to destroy the peaceful operation of this government. Now, where will you find the strength to counterbalance this spirit if you do not find it in the Negroes of the South? They are your friends and have always been your friends. They were your friends even when the government did not regard them as such. They comprehended the genius of this war before you did. It is a significant fact. It is a marvelous fact. It seems almost to imply a direct interposition of providence that this war, which began in the interest of slavery on both sides, bids fair to end in the interest of liberty on both sides. It was begun, I say, in the interest of slavery on both sides. The South fighting to get it beyond the limits of the United States Constitution, and the North fighting to retain it within those limits. The South fighting for new guarantees, and the North fighting for the old guarantees. Both despising the Negro, both insulting the Negro. Yet, the Negro, apparently endowed with wisdom from on high, saw more clearly the end from the beginning than we did. When Seward said the status of no man in the country would be changed by the war, the Negro did not believe him. When our generals sent their underlings in shoulder straps to hunt the fleeing Negro back from our lines into the jaws of slavery, from which he had escaped, the Negroes thought that a mistake had been made, and that the intentions of the government had not been rightly understood by our officers in shoulder straps, and they continued to come into our lines, threading their way through bogs and fens, over briars and thorns, fording streams, swimming rivers, bringing us tidings as to the safe path to march, and pointing out the dangers that threatened us. They are our only friends in the South, and we should be true to them in this, their trial hour, and see to it that they have the elective franchise. I know that we are inferior to you in some things, virtually inferior. We walk about you like dwarfs among giants. Our heads are scarcely seen above the great sea of humanity. The Germans are superior to us. The Irish are superior to us. The Yankees are superior to us. They can do what we cannot, that is, what we have not been hitherto been allowed to do. But while I make this admission, I utterly deny that we are originally or naturally or practically or in any way or in any important sense inferior to anybody on this globe. This charge of inferiority is an old dodge. It has been made available for oppression on many occasions. It is only about 6 centuries since the blue-eyed and fair-haired Anglo-Saxons were considered inferior by the hardy Normans, who once trampled upon them. If you read the history of the Norman conquest, you will find that this proud Anglo-Saxon was once looked upon as a coarser clay than his Norman master, and might be found in the highways and byways of old England laboring with a brass collar on his neck, and the name of his master marked upon it. You were down then. You're up now. I am glad you are up. And I want you to be glad to help us up also. Wherever men oppress their fellows, wherever they enslave them, they will endeavor to find the needed apology for such enslavement and oppression in the character of the people oppressed and enslaved. But if we know enough to be hung, we know enough to vote. If the Negro knows enough to pay taxes to support the government, he knows enough to vote. Taxation and representation should go together. If he knows enough to shoulder a musket and fight for the flag, fight for the government, he knows enough to vote. If he knows as much when he is sober as an Irishman knows when he is drunk, he knows enough to vote on good American principles. The honor of a nation is an important thing. It is said in the scriptures, "What doth it profit a man if he gain the whole world and lose his own soul?" It may be said also, "What doth it profit a nation if it gain a whole world but lose its honor?" I hold that the American government has taken upon itself a solemn obligation of honor to see that this war, let it be long or short, let it cost much or let it cost little, that this war shall not cease until every freedman at the South has the right to vote. It has bound itself to it. What have you asked the black man of the South, the black man of the whole country, to do? Why, you have asked them to incur the enmity of their masters in order to befriend you and to befriend this government. You have asked us to call down not only upon ourselves, but upon our children's children, the deadly hate of the entire Southern people. You have called upon us to turn our backs upon our masters, to abandon their cause and espouse yours, to turn against the South and in favor of the North, to shoot down the Confederacy and uphold the flag, the American flag. And now, what do you propose to do when you come to make peace? To reward your enemies and to trample in the dust of your friends? Do you intend to sacrifice the very men who have come to the rescue of your banner in the South and incurred the lasting displeasure of their masters thereby? Do you intend to sacrifice them and reward your enemies? Do you mean to give your enemies the right to vote and take it away from your friends? Is that a wise policy? Is that honorable? Could American honor withstand such a blow? I do not believe you will do it. I think you will see to it that we have the right to vote. There is something too mean in looking upon the Negro when you are in trouble as a citizen and when you are free from trouble as an alien. When this nation was in trouble in its early struggles, it looked upon the Negro as a citizen. In 1776, he was a citizen. At the time of the formation of the Constitution, the Negro had to write the vote in 11 states out of the old 13. In your trouble, you have made us citizens. In 1812, General Jackson addressed us as citizens, fellow citizens. He wanted us to fight. We were citizens then. And now, when you come to frame a conscription bill, the Negro is a citizen again. He has been a citizen just 3 times in the history of this government, and it has always been in times of trouble. In times of trouble, we are citizens. Shall we be citizens in war and aliens in peace? Would that be just? I ask my friends who are apologizing for not insisting upon this right, where can the black man look in this country for the assertion of his right? If he may not look to the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society. I understand the anti-slavery societies of this country to be based on 2 principles. First, the freedom of the blacks in this country. And second, the elevation of them. Let me not be misunderstood here. I am not asking for sympathy at the hands of abolitionists, sympathy at the hands of any. I think the American people are disposed often to be generous rather than just. I look over this country at the present time, and I see educational societies, sanitary commissions, freedmen's associations, and the like, all very good. But in regards to the colored people, there's always more that is benevolent than just manifested towards us. What I ask for the Negro is not benevolence, not pity, not sympathy, but simply justice. The American people have always been anxious to know what they shall do with us. General Banks was distressed with solicitude as to what he should do with the Negro. Everybody has asked the question, and they learned to ask it early of the abolitionists. What shall we do with the Negro? I have had but one answer from the beginning. Do nothing with us. If the apples will not remain on the tree of their own strength, if they are worm-eaten at the core, if they are early ripe and disposed to fall, let them fall. I am not for tying or fastening them on the tree in any way except by nature's plan, and if they will not stay there, let them fall. And if the Negro cannot stand on his own legs, let him fall also. All I ask is give him a chance to stand on his own legs. Let him alone. If you see him on his way to school, let him alone. Don't disturb him. If you see him going to the dinner table at a hotel, let him go. If you see him going to the ballot box, let him alone. Don't disturb him. If you see him going into a workshop, just let him alone. Your interference is doing him a positive injury. General Banks' so-called preparation is of a piece with this attempt to prop up the Negro. Let him fall if he cannot stand alone. If you will only untie his hands and give him a chance, I think he will live. He will work as readily for himself as the white man. A great many delusions have been swept away by this war. One was that the Negro would not work. He has proved his ability to work. Another was that the Negro would not fight, that he possessed only the most sheepish attributes of humanity, was a perfect lamb or an Uncle Tom, disposed to take off his coat whenever required, fold his hands, and be whipped by anybody who wanted to whip him. But the war has proved that there is a great deal of human nature in the Negro, and that he will fight. As Mr. Quincy, our president, said in earlier days than these. when there is reasonable probability of his whipping anybody.
Well done, Mr. Douglass. Well done.
Thank you.
Well done. Ladies and gentlemen, we are greatly honored today to have Mr. Douglass with us. I challenge anyone to find a man who will speak ill of the Negro when they have met this man, a man who raised himself up from slavery, who has spoken his own words, who has taken up the cause, the most noble of God's causes, and now here he stands before us, I say, as eloquent as any man has ever been, even our recently deceased good President Lincoln. Thank you so much, Mr. Douglass, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So I do believe we have some if anyone has any questions from the audience, I'm sure Mr. Douglass and myself will be happy to elocute most eloquently, better than I can. Mr. Douglass will speak very well and put to rest any concerns you may have about granting the franchise to the Negro.
All right. Hello. Our first question is actually about your name, Mr. Douglass. So we understand that, like many of those who escaped from slavery, you ended up changing your name. Could you speak to us about why you made that decision and why other enslaved people would change their names?
Yes. So my birth name was Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, but after I escaped to freedom, I chose my new surname, Douglass. And this was in part because I needed to hide my identity when I initially escaped so that I would not be caught and returned to my former master. As you may also know, I left the country and spent a couple years in Europe before returning. But choosing a different name also felt like a new beginning for me. I asked a friend of mine, Mr. Johnson, if he could suggest a new last name for me, and he happened to be reading a poem by Walter Scott in which a character was named Douglass, and I liked the sound of that name and decided from then on to be Frederick Douglass.
Oh, very well, very well. And I see that we were wondering about your education. How were you educated if you were not given a proper education as a child? Yes, tell us how you learned.
I was widely self-educated for a good part of my life. When I was younger, one of my former master's wives attempted to teach me how to read, and I learned how to read a bit from her, but when I was around 12, she got caught doing this by her husband and was told that she was no longer allowed to do that. When I was in town running errands for my master, I would take a few pieces of bread and ask white children I knew in town to teach me what they were learning in exchange for it. And I also read anything else I could get my hands on, so whether that was newspapers, magazines, advertisements, and one of my favorites, the Bible. That was my education. And I also tried to teach other slaves how to read once I had learned. I believe the knowledge is the pathway from slavery to freedom, because it's hard to oppress someone when they know that there's more out there.
Well said.
And Mr. Glenn, perhaps you could tell us, what is the abolitionist's point of view now that we are nearing the end of this Civil War? what do you and the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society want to see in terms of education for the new freed population?
Well, we believe that, as we have believed for quite some time, that abolition is only the first step. Abolition and the elimination of slavery and the freeing of those who are enslaved is, of course, the first and most important step. And thanks to this, the sacrifice of those who have fought in this war, we seem to have achieved that. But that is something that is the foundation of a strong building, a strong home that we want to build. We believe that education is the key that unlocks the door to the rest of one's life. And so we believe that we should provide as much education as possible in the South for all of our recently enslaved friends. We must send teachers, we must raise money to pay those teachers to go south, to begin basic education. I have heard that in areas where the Union has control and have already begun this, that almost every single young Negro child flocks to school and is there every single day, not because their parents make them, but because this is what they want. So there is a great thirst for knowledge in the South. We must educate them, and as they become educated, not only with reading, writing, and arithmetic, they must become productive members of society, not merely field hands to work in labor in cotton fields. They must learn trades. They must learn carpentry and mechanics. They must learn how to be a productive member of society. For they, as Mr. Douglass had said, they are our friends in the South. And if we wish and we must remake the South in the image of what the United States should and could be, then we will rely on our friends to make it so. Education is by far the most important step in that process.
And you bring up another topic with parents, and we do have a question about Mr. Douglass. We know that many of those who were enslaved were separated from their families. What was your family like when you were growing up?
Yes, my mother and I were separated when I was but an infant. As you said, it was a common custom, especially in the part of Maryland from which I ran away, to part children from their mothers at a very early age. I do not recollect ever seeing my mother by the light of day. She would lie down with me and get me to sleep, but long before I waked, she was gone. It was rumored that my father was my master, but the correctness of this opinion, I know nothing. But after being separated from my mother as a child, I lived with my maternal grandmother, Betsy, who was also a slave, and her husband, Isaac, who was a free man. And at the age of 6, I was separated from my grandmother and moved to a plantation to work. A few years later, when my then master, Aaron Anthony, died, I was given to Lucretia Auld, a family member of his, and lived in the city of Baltimore. And Mrs. Auld was kind to me, and I had a better experience with them than many other people had in different places. But that's mostly what I know about my family.
I see. And we also have a question. Were Black troops given veterans benefits after the Civil War? And did you serve in the Civil War, Mr. Douglass? Now, Mr. Douglass, this does bring up something that you advocated for quite strongly to President Lincoln, the late
Absolutely.
President Lincoln himself. Perhaps you could tell us about your relationship with Lincoln and what you advocated for.
Yes, so I personally did not serve in the war. A couple of my sons are serving in the war. But my relationship with Mr. Lincoln was one of great respect and great admiration, and I felt that that was mutual. I admired the president, and during the Civil War, I learned that Black Union soldiers who were caught by the Southern Confederacy were being tortured by the Confederacy. I went to the White House without an appointment to see the president and expected to wait half a day or maybe even more if I was to be seen at all. And within minutes of my arrival, Mr. Lincoln met with me to hear my concerns. He listened to my concerns and soon after made efforts to ensure the safety of those Black soldiers. I went on to recruit Black soldiers for the Union, and to work with Lincoln toward the prosperity of former slaves. And this was my biggest impact on the war. So I'm a little bit too old to serve at the moment. My back would not hold up to that, but I'm a full advocate for the participation of black soldiers in this war.
And I would argue that whatever cause you may feel is a reason to not grant the franchise to our friends, I would remind you that over 180,000 of them have joined the Union forces in blue, have fought, have bled, and have died to secure not just their own freedom, but the blessings of liberty for all, north, south, east, and west, for our great Union. So if for no other cause than that, the franchise must be granted.
And it is not unheard of for black soldiers to receive benefits after the war's over. As far as this one goes, we'll see. I'm sure that largely depends on which side is victorious.
That's indeed. As I understand it, there's much pressure afoot to the government to grant those same veterans benefits after the war. We had to fight, and those Union soldiers had to fight. The Negro soldiers had to fight most vociferously to receive the same pay as white soldiers. That was eventually granted, but not at first.
Now, Mr. Glenn, Mr. Douglass mentioned in his speech that the war was not always for the enfranchisement of those who were enslaved or for the liberation of those who were enslaved. How have anti-slavery societies like your own dealt with this issue? I mean, were they the ones who were really pushing for this Civil War to be about the liberation of Negroes in the South?
That is an excellent question. I would say that we wish to achieve abolition and equality through peaceful means. We as a group, and none of my friends that I know ever pressed for a war by any stretch of the imagination. But it was the Southerners who began the war. It was the Southerners who separated. It was the Southerners who fired the first shot. So as a result, the war was placed upon us. And I do admit that most of our northern citizens were not in favor of emancipation or of abolition at the beginning of the war. The cry was to preserve the Union, preserve the Union. Whatever that Union may be, with slavery or without, was beside the point. But thanks to the works of Mr. Douglass, thanks to President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation and the eventual growth of the spirit of liberty that was the slaves themselves in the South, those poor enslaved people who really set the course of this war being about freeing the slaves. For our northern armies could march victorious, but they took the risk to come to us, first by ones and twos, tens and twenties, and soon by the thousands. And it became very apparent, not by an act of Congress or by a proclamation by the president, but from the mere reality of the situation. Wherever our armies went, there went freedom and there followed liberty. Those enslaved souls knew they had only to reach the boys in blue, whether they be white or black, and they would be free. The armies assured that, and our government merely followed along with a little bit of pressure from the likes of Mr. Douglass and our Abolition Society.
Yes, and some of that pressure or just the understanding of the cruelties of slavery were really brought to the public through your earlier autobiography, Mr. Douglass. If you could tell us, what pushed you to write this autobiography, and what was the response like?
Yes, so exactly for the reason that was just pointed out, it is one of the largest reasons that I wrote and expounded upon my childhood in one of my autobiographies. After I wrote this autobiography, I had to leave the country because my identity was obviously exposed in it. But one of the biggest reasons that I wrote this autobiography was to show the cruelties and indignities of slavery. It was to show many people in the North who had never seen with their own eyes the conditions that these people in the South live in, these people in the South live in, how they were treated. There were some critics who could not believe that a slave could write so well, but this only further proved my point that black people were capable of so much more than what was expected of us. I also went around the country giving speeches about my experiences as a slave for white people to see for themselves that I, a former slave, could speak so eloquently. It was also a way to show people that I was as human as they were. I was invited to speak at abolitionist meetings and lecture at anti-slavery societies, but it's important to also speak to those who disagree with you, because then you have people from both sides of the table coming together to create a conversation. Now, I have said before, where justice is denied, where poverty is enforced, where ignorance prevails, and where any one class is made to feel that society is an organized conspiracy to oppress, rob, and degrade them, neither persons nor property will be safe. And I believe that was the case and is the case in this country. But I can feel us getting closer and closer to this precipice that is glory, freedom, and justice, which are the foundation, which is the foundation which this country was established upon.
Hear, hear, sir. Hear, hear.
So in your autobiography, you also describe the challenges that you went through and the risks that you took to actually escape, as so many have. Could you tell us, what was your escape like and what did you face?
Yes, I escaped to freedom with the help of Anna Murray, who would later become my wife. And when we met, we were both working near the docks by the water in Maryland. She gave me hope that I too would one day be free, because she was already a free woman, which was rare in the South. In September of 1838, I boarded a train to Philadelphia disguised as a sailor, as the Navy has black sailors. I credit this idea to Anna, who provided the sailor outfit as well as identification papers obtained from a free black sailor. So I made it to a safe house, a place that an abolitionist protected slaves who were escaping. I made it to New York City, and then I sighed with relief that our plan had worked. And it felt like nothing else that I have felt in my life until then and since then. Just knowing the opportunity that awaited me, simply because I did not have to answer to another person every single hour of every single day.
And you did mention that you traveled to England, and I understand that you did need to get out of the country for your own safety, but this experience was very influential on you. Could you tell us about your travels in England?
Yes. I traveled and talked about abolition in England and Ireland, especially after I wrote my autobiography. Visiting Europe was especially memorable experience. It was the first time I could experience freedom without fear. I recall writing something that goes a little bit like, I gaze around in vain for one who will question my equal humanity, claim me as a slave, or offer me an insult. I employ cab. I am seated beside white people. I reach the hotel. I enter the same door. I am shown into the same parlor. I dine at the same table, and no one is offended. I find myself regarded and treated at every turn with the kindness and deference paid to white people. When I go to church, I am met by no upturned nose and scornful lip. I was not treated as a color, but as a man for the first time in my life. It was my British supporters who helped emancipate me from Mr. All by raising the funds to purchase my freedom so that I could return to the United States a truly free man, legally.
Wow. So traveling to Europe, you got to experience some liberation. To come back to the United States with that experience must have been really influential for you.
Yes, it really changed my expectations. It raised them, and it raised the standards of which I was fighting for freedom and the level of freedom that black people deserve in this country.
Now, we also have a question. You spoke in your speech about the suffrage for women and for everyone. Can you tell us who do you know that is a suffragist? Who have you been working with, and why do you feel that suffrage should be for everyone?
Oh, absolutely. I completely support suffragists. I have worked with more suffragists than I can name, but I can name a few for you that you may have heard of: Sojourner Truth, Susan B. Anthony, Lucy Stone, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. We've all worked together to ensure the freedom and rights of everyone, because I believe that as long as one person in this country is unequal to anyone, then equality is a fear. Inequality is a fear everywhere.
Well, Mr. Douglass, thank you so much for joining us today. Mr. Glenn, would you like to make some closing remarks for our Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society meeting today?
I will say only this, because Mr. Douglass has spoken all the words that need be said about our most glorious and right cause. I will say that I encourage you to read Mr. Douglass's narrative of when he was a slave and how he raised himself out of that. I encourage you to attend all of the abolition societies that you can, and perhaps most importantly, I encourage you to give generously to all the causes that you think may improve not only our station, but the station of all those who deserve education and freedom.
All right. Thank you to all of our audience members for joining us today, and especially a big thank you to Mr. Frederick Douglass. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.